Please note, we would like to make it very clear, we are totally against the form of discipline described in the articles and accounts being used on minors and non-consenting adults. Although some of these accounts are fictional, and others may be an exaggerated reality, none of them are too far from the truth of what really happened back in those days.
Sibling school punishment. Did anyone ever sit in class assembly and watch their brother or sister get a caning or spanking from their teacher, headmaster, headmistress? While not involving the personal sibling relationship you were doubtless expecting, I can confirm that the literal answer to your above query is yes. There were twin brothers in my class at junior school, and one of them was in front of me in the queue for the slipper when I made that long walk to the front of the class to be bent over a front row desk and whacked. His brother was in class that day as he was seated quite near the front, and I recall him in my vision while I waited for the slipper to descend. That twin would certainly have witnessed his brother's punishment. I saw twin brothers spanked at my primary school by the infamous Mr. Witham, who has featured prominently in previous posts on this forum. There were half a dozen of us kept in after school with our class teacher supervising the detention. Old Witham entered the classroom, took one look at the written punishment the one brother was completing, and immediately told him to bend over the desk. A hand spanking on the seat of the boy's short grey trousers followed. The headmaster then administered the same punishment to his twin brother, and we all sat there expecting the headmaster to work his way through the group of miscreants. For some reason, Witham decided that 2 spankings were enough for one day, and we all breathed a sigh of relief. I only experienced that one time. When I was in 4th grade, I earned a spanking by raising my voice at the teacher who sent me to the principal's office. The principal was my Uncle Marlon. I was told to return just after lunch. When I returned, I was waiting in the waiting area, and just after I got there, my brother Bobby, a 6th grader, arrived as well. He had thrown a book at another boy in his class. When Uncle opened his door, I think he was surprised at both of us being there. We were invited in. Boys and girls were never spanked in the presence of one another, but since we were siblings, an exception was made. He received 10 whacks and I got 7. His after every whack made me chuckle inside. Since my uncle and dad lived on the same parcel of land, nothing happened at school that my dad did not learn about from my uncle. Unlike what many have said here and on other forums, we were never threatened with another spanking at home, although sometimes we had extra chores assigned to us. All Dad would sometimes say as he hoped his brother warmed our behinds accordingly. We did receive it at times with the others, but almost always segregated by gender. Poor Daddy had to deal with 8 kids, 6 of them girls. Uncle Marlon had 2 girls and 2 boys from first wife, and 2 girls and 1 boy from his second wife. My Uncle Sam had 3 girls and 2 boys, Cousin Richard had 2 girls and 3 boys, and Cousin Woody had 6, 2 girls and 4 boys. All of us lived nearby on 300 acres of land that was bought by all 5 of the men. That meant between them all, there are 29 kids there, 17 girls and 12 boys. So yes, sometimes we got together, but rarely in mixed gender situations. The R's were funny to me because he usually let out more when we got them at home. In my class at secondary school there were twins, boy and a girl, and also their female cousins. The girls used to always sit together in class. When a boy was summoned to the front for punishment, they would immediately take note, giggling to each other, and when a very loud whack landed they both joined in with the OOHs emitting from the rest of the class. They took special note when their male sibling was called to the front to touch his toes. The girls were sat at the desk next to mine, so I noticed their reaction. A lot of the other girls were just as bad at getting enjoyment from our pain. Just glad my sister was not in my class. She would have loved to see me touching my toes, bottom facing the class, having the seat of my trousers soundly slippered by a male teacher. In the obituary for George Goring, who ran the Goring Hotel in London's Belgravia and died last week, it is reported that he and his twin endured what they recalled as Dickensian school days, in which they were caned weekly for minor transgressions, sharing the punishment equally since their masters could not tell them apart. The school is not named. Punishing the wrong boy by mistake might be understandable, if careless, but deliberately caning an innocent boy was clearly wrong. Goring was born in 1938, so these incidents presumably took place in the early 1950s. SCP of siblings certainly happened at my schools in the 50s and must have happened at many schools whose catchment area was often very local. The only time I actually saw it and remember it was when I was in first year at junior school, still aged 7, and I was late for school. Previously nothing had happened when I was late, just been made to wait outside until assembly finished and then be let inside. This time a lot were late, maybe 20 boys. The girls had a separate entrance. When we were allowed in, the assembly had finished and we were taken into the annex at the end of the assembly hall. The headmaster was there and he had what he had described to us shortly after we had started at the school as his proper cane. When we started at the big school in a class of probably nearly 50 within the first week, the headmaster came into our classroom and called out a couple of boys, for what reason I never knew. It could have been at random, and produced a short stick and told the boys to hold out their hand and basically tapped them with it and said, "This is what you can expect if you misbehave at this school." About a week or so later did exactly the same thing again. A few weeks later he came into our classroom again, but with a long stick, and called 3 boys out, and for the first time I heard the familiar swish and crack I was to hear fairly often. At least one of the boys cried. The headmaster said this was his proper cane and would use it all the time in future. Not sure why the headmaster did what he did. Explanations to kids were few and far between in those days. As we found out later, our teacher was new and it was her first job, and she was the only teacher in the school who didn't have her own cane or strap. So it may have just been to make an impression on us. When I saw the head and his cane, I realized he was going to cane us. He said those with an excuse move over to the wall. Most of the boys moved, leaving only 3 or 4 of us in the middle. Then he said the bus being late is not an excuse. Most of the boys walked back and I saw Joseph from my class and his brother Kevin, who was a couple of years older, together. Then I heard the familiar swish and crack as the boys held out their hands, and the crowd in the middle of the room got smaller. I watched as Kevin held out his hand and was followed by Joseph. Very shortly after, I started my nearly 10-year relationship with a cane and strap. I walked to the cloakroom and can't remember my hand hurting that much. I was not in tears, even though I had been very close to them before I'd held out my hand. Joseph was in the cloakroom, he was not in tears either. We didn't speak. Many years later I was in local restaurant with my girlfriend, and at the next table was a friend from the same pub quiz team I played in. I knew he'd been to the same junior school as myself, but a couple of years older. He was with his wife, his elder sister and her husband. After the meal we all started talking. The subject of school came up and that of CP. His elder sister had gone to the same school as ourselves, and one morning when she had been taking her young brother to school they had been late, resulting in him getting the cane from the headmaster, and she was given the cane from a women teacher, Miss OS, who had left the year before I had arrived. We had been told about her at infant school as she took first year cause she caned the girls. While I was at the school, girls were never caned for being late. My friend's wife said she and her sister at their secondary school had both been given the strap from the headmaster a couple of times for being late. Even though in both cases she claimed it hadn't been their fault. Fred is writing of the 1950s, 60-70 years ago now. Many primary schools in GB caned across hands, used on both boys and girls then. Of course it varied area to area and even school to school. Some schools only caned boys. In others only women teachers caned the girls. Bottom caning in junior schools was far less common than in senior schools. Many girls' senior schools only caned across hands, many girls' school didn't use SCP at all. Whereas the great majority of all boys' schools used SCP, but not all used the cane. Some used a strap, others the slipper, which was usually an old plimsoll. It has to be remembered that times were very different then. Parents had gone through the hardships of WW2. Spanking at house wasn't unusual back in the 50s. That varied even more than at school. It was indeed a feature of school days past, that first exposure to the inevitable and inescapable whacking when caught up in a sudden and arbitrary campaign by the school staff against some aspect of behavior. Lateness as in your case, misbehavior while lining up in the playground as in mine, the result was the same. A separation from the comforting familiarity of regular classmates, an enforced corralling with fellow miscreants, and then the realization of what one's forthcoming fate was to be. Your experience sounds formidable indeed, the headmaster and his cane. Mine, a few years earlier and a little younger I think, was probably rather milder, Miss B and her speciality smack leg. But still an abrupt introduction to the fact that school days weren't necessarily the happiest time of your life whatever the adult world might maintain. And I note that you too recall those huge classes hovering around the 50 mark. Desks in rows and columns all facing the front though. It would never work with the kids seated round tables, some with their backs to the teacher the way they do it now. SCP of siblings in the large mixed secondary modern schools and the later comprehensives must have been fairly common in those that gave SCP a lot. I went to an all-boys grammar school that had an adjoining girls' grammar school. Boys were caned and slippered for bad behavior. My first experience of the cane was from the headmaster. I was second of 3 boys to bend over the desk for 3 strokes of the cane across the seat of my grey short school trousers. I knew nothing of the girls getting either the cane or slipper in school. This was in the late 1950s, back then most parents approved of SCP or at least accepted it as the norm. Many youngsters, both boys and girls, were spanked at home then too. I remember having my pajama trousers being taken down a few times but it was nothing compared to a school caning.